Hello everyone, now that the ModCat is out of the bag and we have successful implementation work in progress wise of Hakchi2 CE for the TurboGrafx-16 Mini, Core Graphics, and of course the PC Engine Mini Classics, sometime in 2023 circa here. Don't be any rush because we want to get this as stable as possible. Danaman827 and Mad Monkey are just working on this whenever they have free time, and you just have to be patient because we want to have a nice stable implementation for public release when it comes to that time. But in any case, you may have a few questions as far as like this roughly 1.2 gigahertz, which is identical to the SNES and NES classics. And obviously those of you who have more savviness as far as knowledge of the Mega Drive Mini, that was severely underclocked at the 1.008 gigahertz. And we're able to successfully get the systems overclocked, of course, and I'm going to give you a little bit of a rundown of this real quick. With the release, you're going to be able to go to Modules, KMFD's Mod Hub, and you're going to be able to get a nice tier of cores right here. You'll be able to get stuff as far as like, here's a little README for the release itself with some hard-coded links for various stuff here, like our Discord, the various links for the different things, like we have them for PlayStation Classic, Amiga 500 Mini, SNES, NES Classics, all that fun stuff. But you'll be able to get like BIOS tabs and all that. Say, for example, you're trying to run a core like Dreamcast, where you need Dreamcast BIOS. You could actually just specifically click the RetroArch BIOS Master module and scroll right here, and you go right down to where Dreamcast is. Flycast Extreme, right here. You essentially need a DC folder, aka DC, and inside it you need a DC boot bin and a DC flash bin. And I'll tell you exactly what I'm talking about here so you have a rough idea. We'll close this up and go to it. And the quickest way to get to your Hakchi directory if you don't know where the hell you are on your computer, just simply right-click and click Show in Windows Explorer, or you can type F4. I'm going to go right into that and go right, and that said I needed a DC folder, so I'm going to go to Etc. Libretto System, and I'm going to make a DC folder right here. And within this DC folder, that's where you do the flash bin right there. You just copy them in there, and then once you have those all copied in there, you go to Modules, Install Extra Modules, and you want to click essentially the RetroArch Master BIOS module. Once you install that, that'll install the Dreamcast BIOS for usage on your system, and of course if you do USB host. And USB host is actually nice and easy on the Mega Drive Mini, and of course the TurboGrafx-16 Mini, because you have a flash drive port, USB port on the front of the system. Whereas on the other systems, such as the Super Nintendo and NES Classics, you have more of like the interface for like the Nintendo Wii. So you'd have to use a micro USB cable port on the back and have an OTG device. And on the Amiga 500 Mini and the PlayStation Classic, you also have flash drives. But there's unfortunately a limiter inhibitor for too much power draw if you're on the PlayStation Classic. So if you go any beyond 16 to 32 gigabytes of data, you may have it crash. That's where you buy USB powered hub, which by the way also works on the Mega Drive Mini. I will help you out. But right here, as far as like stuff you can install for the Mod Hub, you have like a BIOS tab. And I have BIOS which I can legally share for essentially MSX 1 and 2 and ColecoVision. Then, of course, some for Amiga. And, of course, the Sharp X68000, which, by the way, they're potentially going to do a mini classic for this as well. So, we have a nice horizon here. And under the KMFD Cheats tab, you can have cheats for like everything from Atari 2600 to Sega 32X, Atari 400, 5200, 7800, the Nintendo broadband set of Teleview, which is great for the BS Zelda games, all that fun stuff. You can go to Chilove, ColecoVision, Dreamcast. And these are just cheats for all the various systems. We have some for MAME 2003 Extreme and Plus, and of course Mega Drive. If you want to play like Sonic the Hedgehog and have like unlimited range, you could install this module. And I'll do separate tutorials on all this fun stuff. For Doom, PlayStation 1. If you want to play Einhander, an earlier great Square Enix game, and the game is just hard as nails. I had a friend come over one time, and he just had trouble with the game, so I put on Invincibility using the RetroArch cheats for PlayStation 1. Essentially, once you have a game open up, you go to RetroArch settings, which is by holding Select and Start, and then you go to Quick Menu, Cheats, choose PS1, choose your cheat, Apply, Resume, and then you have your cheats. Best to do it right when you load the game. Of course, we have the cores themselves. You can run like the 2048, which is an interesting mathematical style thing. Atari 800, which runs Atari 5200 and 800. We have Blue MSX, which runs ColecoVision and MSX 1 and 2. Cannonball, which is, of course, the Outrun engine. Caprice 32, which runs Amstrad CPC. And I have to say, like, one of my favorite games to run on this is the Friday the 13th game. And I love all these horrific games. Like, I'm a big horror fan. And I just started... like today I went to the theater with my friend and my father, and we got to see the new movie Megan, which it reminds you a lot of movies such as the latest Child's Play reboot. For those of you who are uninitiated, there were licensing issues between who had the theatrical rights to Child's Play and the home rights. So that's why we had Brad Dourif in the streaming version of it on, of course, Hulu and YouTube TV, etc. But the theatrical version, they opted to use Mark Hamill for the voice work. I mean, I like them both. It's fun seeing it go in a different direction, almost like Highlander 1 and 2, not even being canon at all. We have Child Love, which has Flappy Bird. A little side story here. The guy who made Flappy Bird, he took it down from like the iPhone store, etc., because he thought people were spending too much time playing it. But there's so many clones of this. I mean, you have a Super Graphics clone of it, the real deal. We have Croco DS, which is also Amstrad CPC. So, I mean, you can do work. We have Daphne, which runs Laserdisc games such as Space Ace, Dragon's Lair 2, etc. The only problem with this is there is no sound. It unfortunately has no sound. In order to have sound, you have to do multi-threading. And the problem with doing multi-thread to single-thread is it makes the timing of the video and audio desync to the point where you hear it, but you cannot see it. So you have to, almost like a see no evil, hear no evil with Gene Hackman. Gene Wilder and Richard Pryor. What am I saying Gene Hackman for? But Gene Hackman's great in everything he's in. But we have Desmoom. It runs Nintendo DS, but it runs it too slow. I mean, it's more or less there to run homebrew games. Dino Thor, which is a great homebrew puzzle block game. Think of like Adventures of Lolo, etc. DOSBox Extreme. If you look here for the command lines, you're able to run DOSBox, DOSBox Pure, and DOSBox SVN by these command lines. And this is nice and easy. I'm going to show you how these command lines work real quick. Before I forget about this, once you add a game into Hakchi, which you're going to go into File, add more games, you can do Auto Detect or As Is. If you don't want to affect the integrity of the game, you do As Is. It'll add the game exactly as it is. But if you want to do Auto Detect, that's more or less useful for some games such as Super Nintendo and such. But if you run like an arcade game, you want to do As Is. An example is this: if you try adding the first Castlevania game for MAME and you do auto detect, it's going to turn it into gibberish. But if you add it as is, it's going to do the MAME zip with the one singular bin inside, and it'll be fine. It'll have the proper MAME conventions. But once you have a game here, you can go to select emulation core with a right click, and here's where you'd actually choose between the different DOS and all that. Unassigned, I can go like right up to here for whichever core. It's all of them. So if you have a DOS game, you can choose between DOSBox, DOSBox Pure, SVN, Apply, Close, and then you could either, we're not going to do that for now, but you could sync the games directly to the Mini Classic, or if you could have a flash drive plugged into your computer and export it to the USB. But we're going to go back to this install extra modules and leave off where we were with the DOS here. Okay, on DOS, you could do Drastic, which is a much better implementation for DS, and you can run games. Most games are going to run with the Drastic command line, but some games like Princess Peach and the Zelda games, anything that is mic driven, you're going to need to use Drastic mic. We have Easy RPG that runs some of the Wolfenstein games, like Spear of Destiny and Wolfenstein. 81's Sinclair ZX81. We have a Russian computer, which is equivalent to the Commodore 64. The Electronica, we could do Final Burn Alpha. And here you have Final Burn Alpha 2012, the most current, CPS-1, CPS-2, CPS-3, which is like the JoJo Bizarre Adventure games, Street Fighter Alpha, all that fun stuff. Then you could run Neo Geo games. FB Neo Extreme, you're going to be able to run stuff like the Death Mouse and Mushi Himasami from Cave Shmups and all that fun stuff. I mean, just an awesome amount of stuff. Here you have FCMM, and you could use standard FCMM here if you want to run games at their pretty much close approximation to the real hardware. But if you run FCMM Extreme, it's going to run stuff uncannily unlike the real hardware. So if you run Contra Force, it'll actually be no slowdown or flicker, and it'd be absolutely just spot on awesome, way better than real hardware. But only use it for games that you really want to spruce up. I mean, if you're playing Gradius on FCMM, it's going to have the real slowdown like on the real hardware, but on here, no slowdown. So if you masochists who want to have bullet hell shmups, here you go. FCMM system extreme. Okay, going down the list, you can run movies. Yes, you can run movies. Keep it to 480p. If you try to run 720p, we do not have hardware acceleration on any of the mini classics, so it'll simply not work well. But 480p is great. We have Flycast, awesome stuff there. You can run Dreamcast, and most games run great. But unfortunately, due to the limitations of it being GLES 2.0 at a max for the minis other than the PlayStation Classic, some games like Dynamite Cop, and of course Cannon Spike are going to have graphical errors. But you can run them on the other mini classics, such as the PlayStation Classic. But the majority of games like Ikaruga and all that, I'd say like 80% of games, maybe up to 85% of games are going to run absolutely fine or reasonably fine on the standard setup here. You can run, this is out there to core for MSX 1 and 2, but if you want to have the more accurate core, you're going to want to use Blue MSX. But here's here for purists who want to run this core as well. We could run the Morgan, not the Morgan Fairchild, but Fairchild Channel F, which has some interesting games as well. We could go down here. I think if I remember correctly, there was a Killer Bees game on this system, which is absolutely just bat crap crazy. You just have to see it for yourself. I believe it was on this system right here, the Channel F. It was just simply called Killer Bees, and it's just crazy. But we can run on television, which I'm a big fan of. And it's interesting because if you know how you have the number pad right here, you can actually use an analog stick to control the pad. So if you're doing Tron Deadly Disc, it is awesome with the analog. You're moving with hand. It's almost like a twin stick shooter style thing, like Smash TV and all that fun stuff. We have Fuse, which runs Sinclair's ZX Spectrum, some fun games on there. And I really like the way they did the music on it, just what they worked within the confines of the hardware limitations, such as even the Goonies game. Compare Goonies on here compared to the Nintendo version for a very distinctively different sound set. Gambetta, you can run Game Boy Color. It also has Super Game Boy palettes and borders in there if you do the core options. Game & Watch, some awesome, phenomenal, fun. And I'm thinking of some of these games, like when I was watching Gremlins on HBO Max the other day, holds up really well in 4K HD resolution. But that movie is so far ahead of its time. And there's, speculatively speaking, supposed to be another Gremlins. Gremlins is going to come back again, so pick up your merchandise now before it starts to become popular and selling out everywhere. We have Game Music, Emu, where we could run some actual GME files from various rips of games. Going down the list, Gear Boy, and this is best for running like hacks of Game Boy and Game Boy Color games. Like if you run the hack of Metroid Samus Returns, Metroid 2 Samus Returns for Game Boy, the palettes are more accurate on Gear Boy than they are on any other Game Boy core. Okay, we have Gear System, same thing, but with Game Gear. Here we have Genesis Extreme GX, and you could do the same thing here. If you want to run Sonic Spinball, use the Extreme portion here, if you don't want to have any slowdown at all. And you can also run custom music soundtracks, which I'll get into more. We have Gloop in here. This is the only Nintendo 64 core that you could use cheats with. It's just the way it worked out as far as the code and such. So if you're worried about cheats, run the games on here. GPSP, this is a great core, but you do need to have prerequisite BIOS. And in that Master BIOS module, you need GBA BIOS bin. And this is very, very beneficial for running some of the stuff like Metroid Zero Mission and Fusion, etc. And some of the Final Fantasy games with less slowdown or flickering. Handy obviously runs Atari Lynx, some fun games on that system. Atari runs, the Atari ST. We have Image Viewer, which you could actually look at like Nintendo Power Scans, etc. And if you open one up while you're in RetroArch, you can actually tap left or right on your D-pad, up or down, and actually scroll through them. Jump and Bump is a nice Mario War style engine. This one is multiplayer only. You cannot do like in artificial intelligence. Speaking of the movie Megan, Child's Play, etc. This is solo. I mean, you really need to have more than one player, more than one controller to get into this. But you'll see what's something really cool when I go down line here. Ludicrous N64 stream. There's a little bit of a side story to this. A while back, somebody made a joke that they are running Conker's Bad Fur Day perfectly, flawlessly on the Mini Classics, which is absolutely impossible. It was not possible, but I went back into the code and scheme of things, and I restructured the core and coded my own variant of this, and I got Conker's Bad Fur Day and many, many other games working. I mean, you just have to see for yourself. I added an extreme overclock and an extreme turbo boost, and I went through and just made the compatibility as high as I could. And aside from like a few games like the Indiana Jones, the Factor 5 game, and the Rogue Squadron, you could pretty much run 99.5% of games on this core, including Killer Instinct. And I even got it where the games no longer crash. Because initially you'd have to have like an extreme virtual RAM because the RAM limitations of the Mini Classics was actually extraordinarily low. There was only like 256 megabytes of RAM on the Genesis, NES, and SNES Classics, and of course, I believe it's roughly the same. I actually forgot what it was for a TurboGrafx-16, but it seems about roughly the same. But on the Amiga 500 Mini, it's 500 megabytes of RAM, and on the PlayStation Classic, it's 1 gigabyte of RAM. But without having this additional RAM, you kind of need an extreme virtual RAM for some things. But I was able to work things out code-wise and get these games running on here, like Killer Instinct and Smash Brothers would actually crash within 5 to 15 seconds. Star Fox would crash after the first stage. And you could go into RetroArch settings and basically toggle this one setting to kind of clear cache, but it just made it very unintuitive and annoying and detracted from the gameplay. But I got it where you can run Star Fox, Mario Kart, Killer Instinct, Paper Mario, and of course stuff like Smash Brothers without it crashing, and you need to run the ludicrous N64 Extreme Amped in order to take advantage of the non-crash worthiness. And this is kind of a combination of dynamic recompiler, on-the-fly data recalculations, and it just does not play well. It's just in Lua script. That's pretty fun stuff too. MAME 2000, 2003 Plus. This is my own personal core here, which I worked on as well for MAME 2003 stream. And I did stuff like, I did my best to make this kind of like the FCMM stream, where I have games like Double Dragon working with no slowdown at all. I mean, even the real game in the arcade had slowdown when there's too many enemies flickering and all that. I removed all that, and I collaborated with a few people from Plus Team, like Mahoney T944, Arcades 2003, Grant 2258, etc. They've all been instrumental and awesome. And of course, from the FB Neo, previously FB Alpha, Dink C64, he's great too. He helped in getting some of the stuff like the Coleco SGM modules working with the FB Neo Extreme Core. I'm going to get into that. I'll do tutorials on all these. We have MAME 2010, which is great for some games that do not run on the other cores. I mean, like Thunderblade Arcade, that's an example. We have 2014 Extreme. Again, these two cores are like Crystal Kings is a great brawler that you're going to want to be able to run on MAME 2010. It's not going to run on these ones here, unfortunately. So some of the higher, later release games, you're going to want to run on 2010 and 2014 Extreme. We have the Neo Geo Pocket, PC Fast. This is where you're going to run your TurboGrafx CD. And you might notice here where it says Games Express. There are actually a few games that were adult-oriented that you need this BIOS for. And again, you're going to go into the Master BIOS module. You at least at a bare minimum need System Card 3 to run most of the TurboGrafx CD games. And this is going to be for, there's an adult game for TurboGrafx CD, which actually uses the Final Fantasy engine from WonderSwan Color. And I'm not even going to show it, but it's called High Leg Fantasy. It is absolutely hysterically funny to play. High Leg Fantasy, you need the G Express PCE to run it. But going down the line, PSFX, this is actually a follow-up system to the TurboGrafx CD. It doesn't run really fast, but there's some phenomenal games on here worth playing. I mean, it's not going to run full speed, and you're going to find some cores do not run full speed, which I'm going to go with. This is one of the slower ones right here. Atari Jaguar is another, and so is Sega Saturn. Unfortunately, Sega Saturn only works well on the PlayStation Classic. Here we have PSX Extreme, and I made this in a certain way where you can essentially run games in HD, etc. And you see, same with the command lines there. Okay? And we have SNES FOSS Extreme. I worked this out where we have games like Super R-Type with no slowdown whatsoever. This is the best core if you want to have no slowdown. We have SuperGrafx, which is an alternate one where you can run SuperGrafx games as well as the normal TurboGrafx-16 and TurboGrafx CD. Virtual Boy is actually fun. You're not going to get the headache from running it. You're going to be able to play some of these games on the screen, and it's actually a lot easier to manage these than playing on the real hardware where you can only stare at it for like Avatar-esque 2 or 3 minutes before you start getting a little bit of eye strain. Here's WonderSwan, and the exact system I was talking about where High Leg Fantasy kind of had the Final Fantasy engine from. This is actually one of the first systems that had a remake of Final Fantasy. We have Melon DS, the other Nintendo DS core, also very slow. Mass Extreme, you can run like Philips CDI games on here, such as Mario Hotel and the Zelda CDI games. It's ridiculous. MGBA, run Game Boy Color, and of course Game Boy Advance games. We have him, Mr. Boom, which is a great Dino Blaster, a.k.a. Bomberman clone, and it is awesome. It is as close to you get, if not better, than a Sega Saturn implementation. This guy has worked on this for many, many years. FRRANCK, Frank. He's been a great person there. We have Moopin 64 Stream. You're going to need this if you're going to be running like the Rogue Squadron game. And, of course, the Dinosaur Planet, the beta, should we say prototype, which just surfaced in the last few years. That runs on this core as well. And, of course, if you want to run the Star Wars Rogue Squadron, you can run Neo Geo CD. Nostopia is a great NES core. It's good for stuff like Micro Machines, which do not run on any other core. Micro Machines for NES only runs properly on Nostopia. And that same company that made that actually has gone on for many, many years. And I got a recent game on PS5 by them. Yes, Micro Machines on NES. And on PlayStation 5, I have Grid Legends by the same company. Just fantastic company. MP2 Kai Extreme, which runs PC98. And this game right here called Rusty is Castlevania without being Castlevania. I kind of feel they made it to be a Castlevania game, then lost the license. NX Engine, Cave Story, fun game. And you can also run the Mega Drive version of Cave Story on the Mega Drive core. O2 EM. No, this might actually be the one Killer Bees. It was Odyssey 2 that had Killer Bees. Sorry, forget what I said earlier on the other one. Odyssey 2 is the one with Killer Bees. Remember that. You can run open board games. There's so many great ones you can run. You have the LNS where you can run the Final Fight LNS game. You can run just so many great open board games. And right here, Night Slashers. This is another game you can run on Main 2003 Extreme, but here's the open board variant of it. And just look how phenomenal this game is. It's one of my absolute favorites to run. And you have Beats of Rage. I mean, you can run hundreds of these games on here great with this update. This is just an update for all the minis coming on the next release. I did what I could to get 3DO running better. And Demolition Man is one of my absolute favorite shmup-style games, over-the-shoulder style shmup games, almost like Duke Nukem style. Obviously, Road Rash is fantastic on it. There's just a whole bunch of great games to play on it. Parallel and 64 Stream, which I fixed up. You're going to be able to run, again, right here. Conquer's Bad Fur Day better in its next release, as well as Pilot Wings, etc. And here's where I have the PlayStation running HD. So if you want to run games at roughly 60 frames per second on most of the mini classics, you're going to run the PCSX Rearmed HD Extreme Core and just try this out on some games. I mean, Die Hard Trilogy is one that I worked in getting, where every time there's an explosion when you run at higher resolution, the game would slow down to a crawl, but I got it running just smooth, and it's not slow as molasses like it used to be. And if you're not worried about HD, you can run the PCSX Rearmed Neon. Of course, if you have issues and want to go back to more of like an older code base, PCSX1. So you have options here, folks. Pico Drive Extreme, you can run 32X games on this. 32X games do not run on Genesis plus GX, unfortunately. But you can also run the 32X CD-ROM games, like Fahrenheit and all that. Here you can run straight-up MP3s, and you can actually run karaoke packages where you'll see it on the screen and all that. Pokemon mini games, some fun stuff there. That's kind of what they look like there. Potator, Supervision, almost like a generic version, almost like a knockoff version of the Game Boy, but there's some quality games on there. Here you have variants for PSP, and this Legacy one, I wouldn't really recommend using this as far as most of the minis. It's more or less for a few games like the pinball game, etc., which have issues elsewhere. You have to run these games from the main screen. So, like, the main menu, you have to run it from the main menu. Other games, you can actually be in RetroArch and load them. So you can load Amped and Extreme. Once you're in RetroArch, load content, start directory, click your game, and it will not work properly with Legacy unless you first load a game from the main menu. And I'll do more of a tutorial on this as well. But Amped is great for some stuff, and this is actually going to be used to run Jennifer for OpenBoard in the next update, because OpenBoard Jennifer is quite of a complicated game as far as the scripts are concerned. And I opted to fix the game up and get it working with PPSSPP rather than try to get it working with OpenBoard, because we would have had to break the core in order to get Jennifer in a few games. So you're going to have the option of running some of the more stubborn OpenBoard games using PPSSP Extreme Amped. Okay, we also have Pro System, which runs the Atari 7800. Great stuff there. You can run the awesome Commodore Amiga here, and you also have command lines here where you can run Extreme Amped, and I did what I could to get minis games to slow down, and it used to be much more complicated where you had to use like almost like boot Q files, but now you can do direct loading, and my tutorial is up on there, which applies to all the mini classics. PX68000, which is SharpX 68000 here, which I talked about earlier. Okay, Quasi, and that's where you can run the original version of the Castlevania game. And an interesting thing about this hardware here, which I mentioned previously in other videos, is that many games made by Capcom, like Strider, were actually originally developed on this, and they were ported to the arcade version afterwards. But some of these games, they made minor changes. Like, for instance, this driver version on X68000 is kind of funny because every time you use your sword slashing technique, your plasma sword or whatever, he grunts like, like that. Whereas in the actual arcade and Genesis and other versions, they actually changed it to more of a sword slashing noise. But if you want to see something kind of funny, play it on here and you'll see. I mean, otherwise, Bubble Bobble, I'd actually say is better on X68000 than it is the actual arcade port because it has this amazing sound quality. We have Quasi 88, which runs some of the earlier Nintendo games. Like there's a side-scrolling Super Mario Brothers game, which is on here. Nintendo gave permission to the company to make them, and it doesn't have side-scrolling. It actually goes screen by screen, which is very, very interesting to see. And if you play like Contra on the MSX cores, Blue MSX and FMSX, it also does the same thing where it doesn't have side-scrolling. So play the Mario game on Quasi 88, and you'll see non-side-scrolling. Play Contra on MSX, you'll see non-side-scrolling. And another interesting tidbit here is if you play Akari Warriors on MSX core, you'll see actually enemies fall to the ground, and they'll never disappear. I mean, you can have like 20-plus people on the screen at once, which is a little bit ridiculous. But the arcade version and the Nintendo version, they all disappear from the screen. Quick NES, another one can never have enough NES cores. Reminiscence, which runs a great PC port, a reverse engineered flashback. Okay, we have Retro 8, which I got working, which runs Pico 8 games, and there are many of these. There's like a good dozen, 2 dozen, 3 dozen Metroidvania style games. Scumvia, Butthead, Monkey Island, etc. I did what I could to get this work in as good as I could. Sega Master System Plus. Same guy who worked on some of the other cores. SNES 9X Extreme. Here you have multiple command lines. One of the most stable ones is SNES 9X 2005. But if you want to be able to run the MSU1 games, the full CD soundtracks, you're going to need to use SNES 9X right there, or Bright, or 9X Extreme. So you get, like, the normal games without CD soundtracks, you're going to be able to run with these ones right here. But anything to the right of this right here, anything from 9X to Extreme, you're going to be able to use the MSU1 things. And the Extreme is a little bit more of the removal, slowdown, and all that, but SNES Extreme FOSS is better if you want to be able to run stuff like Mega Man Crab Stage, Mega Man X2, the Lobster Crab Stage. When those slow down, do the Metafit SNES FOSS. Going down the list here, we have Stella, which runs the Atari 2600. And by the way, I'm going to have a better Gamma style variant of this for the update, so it'll be like a Stella Extreme. Previously, I wasn't able to get this working on here, but for the update, I have it going. There's actually numerous cores in here, which I got running for this update on all the mini classics. And here's the other version, kind of like the jump and bump, Super Mario Brothers War. I'm going to call it Super Mario War because it really is, but for the libretto implementation, they call it Super Brothers War. But here, you can go into the settings, the core settings, and add AI opponents. So you can play 4-player mode activate by yourself. TBG Duel, you can do like Tetris, 2-player mode activate. This is the only core you can do 2-player mode activate with Game Boy games. You can't do it with Game Boy Color, but you can do it with the Dual Link games for Game Boy. Okay, going down the list, we have Theodore, which runs the Thompson MO5, some fun games on there. Tick 8, which is some fun fan-made games as well. I mean, shmups, adventure games, all that. TYR Quake, we can run the Quake games, fun stuff. Here's another version of Amiga right here, UAE 4-Arm Extreme. And this has less slowdown than PUA Extreme. You can run like Shadow of the Beast, etc. And even just if you have trouble with some of the games on the PUA Extreme, run UAE 4-Arm Extreme. Going down the list here, we have Uzum, which is other fan-made games. And there's Zombie Naders, a great game. I have it in the Mod Hub. You can play that. It's a great twin-stick shooter style game. VecX for the Vectrex, and this is kind of interesting. Just watch commercials of the Vectrex. It really was like a very, very interesting thing. Like I have to say, like pole position on here is very, very fun with the way these Vectrex vector style graphics are. And speaking of MAME 2003 Extreme, vector games like Star Wars Arcade didn't previously work in 2003 Plus and Extreme, but a few years ago we fixed them up to all work in there, and many of these great games all work in there fine now. Emulator, you can run some of them. You remember the virtual MU games for Dreamcast, like Godzilla and all that. Some of these are actually emulated on this core. It's a standalone core. Has nothing to do with the actual Dreamcast Flycast core. Vice Extreme, for those of you who want to run Commodore 64, 28, and VIC-20. Yeah, VIC-20 is the thing that I got more recently going on there. Right down the list, we have Virtual Jaguar. These games run incredulously slow. You could run some of the Jaguar games a little bit faster with the Mesh Extreme core, but if you want to play some of these games like Rayman, Alien vs. Predator, etc., you can run them on here for better or worse as well as they run. X1 Millennium. Here's another version of Mario on here, which also has the 9-side scrolling worth checking out. We have X-Rick, which is Rick Dangerous. And the people who made this game, Core Design, they went on to, I believe, if I remember correctly, I think they went on to make Tomb Raider. Don't quote me on that, but I'm pretty sure from my recollection that's how it is. We have Yabu's Extreme, which runs Sega Saturn. And I did what I could with a few variants here. I mean, unfortunately, we do not have the ability to use dynamic recompiler with this. It is more software rendering. So unfortunately, you're not going to be able to run these full speed like you can for the most part on PlayStation Classic. But you could use these command lines. Like if you run like Shinobi Legions, you could go to X2 or Darius. You can run X2. It'll make the game run a little bit better. You could do Guardian Heroes as well. And you could even do the Panzer Dragoons Y. Panzer Dragoon 1 doesn't run as well as Panzer Dragoons Y. And you could also run Saga. But you might have issues switching to the second disc in Saga. I mean, it can be done, but it takes a little bit of ingenuity to do it. Here you have versions for RetroArch for the release. For those of you who are not worried about doing all the crazy extreme stuff, you can just run Ozone, which is more of like a Nintendo Switch interface. If you want to do the more extreme stuff and have it to the most extreme performance and tolerability, I just push it to the limits. They're like ludicrous speed-wise. You're going to want to run RetroArch 1A4 Extreme. You can do so many things with this that you can't really do with Ozone, just the way this is compiled and set up. And if you run Ludicrous, N64, Dreamcast, all that, and you're not really just focused on like main stuff like Nintendo, Super Nintendo, Genesis, all that fun stuff, even like standard PlayStation and non-HD, you could run Ozone. But if you want to run all the crazy stuff, just want and abandon here, go to 1A4 Extreme for the update. And of course, like the little side story about how I did Ludicrous N64 Extreme Core. When I did the core, I was trying to think of a clever name for it, and I kept thinking of the movie Spaceballs. And when they do the ludicrous speed, we've gone plaid. So I named it kind of based off of a little homage to that. Here you can do custom arcade samples, and we have the ability to run like CD soundtracks for Final Fight, Mortal Kombat, NBA Jam, Outrun, Michael Jackson's Moonwalker, Double Dragon, Street Fighter 2, and I have to actually update this because Chrono and Mahoney T944 helped get like 12 plus more of these. So we can run over like close to 24 of these now in Main 2003 Extreme. I mean, there are way, way, way many more. I'll have them in the release notes. But Shinobi is one of them. Bionic Commando. I mean, the list goes on. There's just quite a few of them. Going down the list there. Here's custom artwork here. You might remember if you ever seen this game in the arcade, which I saw in a bowling alley. It has a mirror behind there. So it actually has like a mirror type appearance, and this is like a special graphic overlay to give it like a 3D appearance. If you install this and run the Tron game, and here's a list of the games that run there. Look, that's the ROM names right there, and that's the actual game in the year it came out. But you'll see like Tron will be on the list there, and you need a disc of Tron right there from 1983. I must have been like a little itty bitty kid there, but this just blew my mind seeing a mirror for it. And you might remember like some of the Laserdisc games had like almost like a mirror thing too. But I go down the list there. This is an interesting way for those of you who want to use the Q files for the Amiga setup. The Pierce. You don't want to worry about direct loading. You could use Auto UAA, and BS Leno did a great job on helping out with this stuff and other things. You do custom borders where, like, if you run a PSP core, you could maybe it look like the interface of an actual PSP. And then whenever I played stuff like Soul Calibur Tekken on it, I had to have I'd use my thumb to do the D-pad, and I'd use my fingers to do the buttons. But if you held up in the air, you couldn't do any kind of like 10-hit combos or anything like that. If you have too many games on your system, you could potentially get a C8 error. But if you install this C8 error deterrent, it'll actually give you the ability to have less of a chance and close the shell fast. Here, you have history for May 2003 Plus and 2003 Extreme. So, for instance, if you load Outrun, and then you tap R2, and then you go to history, it'll show the entire history of the game. It'll even say, like, hey, this game was in the movie Donnie Darko. Really, really cool stuff. Here's a nice thing for those of you who don't have an analog controller. You can install this, and you'll be able to run 99.5% of the games with the various Nintendo 64 cores. In Black Sunshine, myself, and Matt Franco 008 all did a bunch of these, so they run on the standard SNES or PlayStation style controller at a minimum, using just the D-pad. Yes, you can run Mario 64, Conker's Bad Fur Day, F-Zero, all the games on just a standard non-analog controller. And I've been running these games like this for the last 2 years now. I haven't even used an analog for any Nintendo games. Here's overlays if you want to have it like a real DS. Here if you want to do like custom playlists and stuff. If you want to change your PSP fonts to be the real deal, this helps out with some of the RPG games and all that. Here's your custom remaps for controllers. Here you can change between different SCUM VM sounds. Here's the default sound. Here you can have an MT32, more of like almost like a Yamaha style sound. Here it has like a MIDI, it almost sounds like NES chiptune style music. Here's patches for various games that might need them, like Blade Runner, Duckman, Hoyle Bridge, Might and Magic, Prince and the Coward, etc. Here we have true MT32, just like even higher quality sound. You can do borders like this for your Gambetta core. You can have custom thumbnails. If you have games added to a playlist and you want to look to the right, you see the box art in-game screenshot. You can do your custom wallpaper for your background or RetroArch. Custom border would be like kind of like the Atari background right here. And yes, I have a lot of jokes.